I'm the descendant of North Koreans. Back when K-pop and K-dramas weren't yet global exports, I had to live in Japan pretending to be Japanese, because discrimination against Koreans, the dreaded chosen-jin label, was that brutal. You either blended in or you were crushed. Now, I never became rich. I didn't inherit castles or palaces or family crests embroidered on silk robes. But here I am, sitting in front of you, speaking in English, delivering sarcastic essays to a global audience. For me, that's enough revenge against the people who thought bloodlines and ancestry determined your worth. And this is where Singapore comes in. Because you, Singaporeans, are the exact opposite of Japan and Britain. You are not descendants of emperors, samurai, or dukes. You are descendants of Chinese peasants. Let's be brutally honest. Not a single one of you can claim royal blood, noble ancestry, or dynastic pedigree. No emperors, no aristocrats, no blue blood. Your great-grandfathers were fishermen, coolies, hawkers, rickshaw pullers, the kind of people history books usually skip because they were too ordinary. And yet, somehow that so-called peasant DNA created a global financial hub. You built skyscrapers on swampland, turned a fishing village into a logistics empire, and made Orchard Road sound fancier than Oxford Street. Meanwhile, the royal-obsessed nations, Japan is drowning in a stagnant economy, where tradition means you work until you drop dead at your desk. Britain is busy polishing its crumbling monarchy, while pretending tea and scones are still global symbols of power. So the irony writes itself. The peasants are thriving, the royals are collapsing, and Singapore's lack of nobility might just be the very reason it works. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Peasants know how to survive. Royals, they know how to wave from balconies and inbreed themselves into medical textbooks. But peasants, your great-grandfathers, sweating shirtless while pulling rickshaws in the tropical heat, they understood hunger, risk, and hustle. And when Singapore became independent in 1965, guess what DNA your leaders tapped into? Not noble tradition, not imperial wisdom. They tapped into the muscle memory of peasants who knew that if you don't work today, you don't eat tomorrow. That desperation, rebranded as meritocracy, became the national religion. Look at the HDB flats. To the untrained eye, they're concrete pigeonholes. But in reality, they're peasant housing 2.0. Efficient, cheap, stacked up like a modern rice paddy. Japan was still obsessed with who gets to sit at the emperor's tea ceremony, while Singapore was busy turning fishermen's huts into mass housing blocks with flush toilets. Education? Same story. While British elites were still polishing Oxford gowns, Singaporean kids were treated like factory products, drilled, tested, sorted, brutal, yes, but effective. Absolutely. Because peasants don't ask if learning calculus at 12 is fulfilling. They just grit their teeth and do it because survival doesn't care about feelings. And here's the punchline. It worked. That survival instinct turned into skyscrapers, Changi Airport, and GDP charts that make Japan's lost decades look like a tragic comedy. The very thing elites sneered at, being just peasants, turned into Singapore's competitive edge. So while Japan and Britain cling to their precious family registries and coats of arms, Singapore quietly weaponized peasant grit into national success. No blue blood needed, just sweat, homework, and a collective refusal to die in the mud. Let's talk about the countries that worship ancestry, Japan and Britain, two places where the family tree matters more than actual competence. And funny enough, both are slowly choking on their own traditions. Take Britain. For centuries, it bragged about noble bloodlines. Yet what do we see today? A monarchy reduced to glorified influencers, waving from balconies in outdated hats, while their tabloids resemble reality TV more than governance. The royal family doesn't actually run the country, they just run up tourism revenue. They're basically Disneyland characters, except with more scandals. And then there's Japan. Oh, Japan. Obsessed with who's pure Japanese, who's descended from samurai, who belongs in the Koseki family registry. But look where that got them. An economy stuck in the 1990s, and a society so desperate for validation that even learning English turned into a national humiliation. Think about it. 12 years of English education, and what do they produce? Generations of people proudly reciting, "This is a pen." That's not English, that's trauma. That's the ghost of Meiji-era education reform haunting classrooms with grammar drills and vocabulary lists that top out at 2,000 words. 12 years. And the result is an adult who can write TOEIC exams but can't order a hamburger abroad without sweating. Meanwhile, Singapore, descendants of peasants, remember, took English and turned it into their operating system. Not just grammar drills, but real-world usage. Singaporeans might speak in Singlish, with la and law sprinkled everywhere. But at least they can negotiate contracts, pitch startups, and annoy Australians at international conferences. Japanese elites, still memorizing word lists like monks copying scripture, terrified of actually opening their mouths. So here's the irony. The countries obsessed with royal ancestry ended up with hollow institutions and fake English fluency. The so-called peasants, meanwhile, mastered survival and built a bilingual nation that can actually function in the global economy. It's almost poetic. Britain clings to crowns, Japan clings to koseki, and Singapore clings to results. Guess who's winning? You know what Britain and Japan have in common? They both look elegant until you scratch the surface. It's like buying an antique teapot that turns out to be plastic from Alibaba. The shine is there, but the substance is missing. Britain sells itself as timeless. Parliament, Big Ben, afternoon tea. But under the Union Jack tablecloth, the dishes are cracked. The empire, gone. The economy, hanging on to financial services like a drunk man clinging to a lamppost. The class system, still alive, where Eton boys run the country while working class kids are told to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, even if their boots are made of cardboard. Japan plays the same game. The surface screams refinement, tea ceremonies, bowing etiquette, cherry blossoms staged for Instagram, but beneath that polite facade, a suffocating corporate death march, collapsing demographics, and a toxic obsession with appearances. Even their English education is performance art. Teachers drill, "This is a pen," not because it's useful, but because it looks academic. It's cosplay fluency, like wearing a tuxedo but forgetting to put on pants. And let's not forget the royal fetish. Britain crowns kings nobody asked for. Japan worships an emperor who waves politely while politicians ruin the economy. Both nations cling to pageantry as if it still guarantees relevance. It's not leadership. It's a historical reenactment society with better costumes. Meanwhile, Singapore never bothered with the costume. No kimonos, no crowns, no tea sets polished for tourists. Just hard concrete, strict laws, and a government that basically said, "We don't care about your ancestors. Can you produce results or not?" That's it. Brutal? Yes. But far more honest than pretending heritage magically makes you superior. So when Brits sip their Earl Grey, pretending it's still the Victorian era, and Japanese businessmen bow deeply while secretly plotting their next karaoke suicide pact, Singaporeans are cashing checks, building ports, and laughing all the way to the bank. Because at the end of the day, elegance without substance is just cosplay. And cosplay doesn't pay rent. Here's the funny part. Britain and Japan are basically two museums pretending to be countries. Their leaders walk around like curators, dusting off bloodlines that should have been retired centuries ago. Britain insists its monarchy unites the people. Really? More like divides them into Netflix viewers binge-watching royal scandals. Half the country treats Buckingham Palace like a soap opera. The other half resents paying taxes for the world's most expensive cosplay family. Their claim to fame? Waving. That's it. They've turned an empire into a balcony act. Japan is no better. Their emperor doesn't even pretend to have power. He's like a porcelain figurine placed in a glass case, untouchable, delicate, and ultimately useless. The political class does all the dirty work, but they need the emperor as a mascot to remind people, see, our bloodline still matters. Meanwhile, the only thing multiplying in Japan isn't prestige, it's unpaid overtime and funerals. And their obsession with purity, don't get me started. Japan acts like it's a crime to have Korean grandparents, while Britain clutches pearls over who married a commoner. The irony? Both nations are collapsing demographically and economically. Turns out royal purity doesn't generate babies or balance budgets. Who knew? Even language becomes theatre. The British flaunt perfect English, yet their economy stumbles like it's drunk on warm beer. The Japanese drill English for 12 years, memorizing 2,000 words, but can't order a cheeseburger abroad without a panic attack. The result? A global stage full of actors rehearsing lines from a play nobody's watching anymore. Meanwhile, Singapore, descendants of peasants, skipped the costume drama. No emperors, no monarchs, no obsession with who your great-grandfather was, just survival, upgraded into policy. And that's why when Britain and Japan are busy polishing tombstones of dead bloodlines, Singapore is busy polishing balance sheets. Because here's the brutal truth. Blue blood doesn't build nations anymore. Sweat does. Britain and Japan love to brag about their long traditions. But here's the thing about tradition. If you cling to it too tightly, it becomes a straitjacket. And right now, both countries look like patients in a psychiatric ward, rocking back and forth, muttering, "But we've always done it this way." Britain clings to its empire like an ex who can't move on. They still pretend their tea, their universities, and their Queen's English give them global authority. Newsflash. Nobody cares. India runs the tech call centers, America runs the culture, and Britain runs nostalgia tours for Americans who want to cosplay Downton Abbey. Japan? Same disease, different costume. They worship their emperor, their cherry blossoms, their unique culture. But what does it produce? A declining population, a stagnant economy, and a corporate culture that's less efficient than a Soviet breadline. Their obsession with appearances is so bad they even faked English education. 12 years in the classroom, only to graduate with the linguistic power of a confused 5-year-old repeating, "This is a pen." That's not education. That's national gaslighting. And let's not forget their delusions of superiority. Britain still thinks the Commonwealth is an empire, even though most members treat it like a gym membership they forgot to cancel. Japan still imagines itself as Asia's cultural leader, but K-pop and K-dramas have already stolen the crown. Their vaunted tradition is nothing more than a trapdoor into irrelevance. Meanwhile, Singapore, the peasant nation with no royals, no emperors, no aristocrats, skipped the cosplay. While Britain and Japan choke on their ancient family trees, Singapore planted money trees. While the royals wave and the emperors bow, Singaporeans hustle, and the results speak for themselves. Global finance, world-class infrastructure, and a seat at the table where real deals are made. So yes, Britain and Japan have traditions, but Singapore has results. And when you're paying rent in 2025, results matter more than royal ceremonies. Here's the paradox. Singapore's greatest weakness, having no kings, no emperors, no dynasties, turned out to be its greatest strength. While Britain and Japan drag around the corpses of their history like family heirlooms nobody dares to throw out, Singapore started fresh. No crowns, no castles, no blue blood burdens, just survival. Because when you strip away all the royal costumes, what's left? People, hungry, restless, desperate to climb. That was Singapore in 1965, a swamp with no pedigree, no aristocrats, no inheritance. And that blank slate became a gift. Without royal bloodlines dictating destiny, every citizen had to fight for their place. Fishermen's sons became engineers. Hawkers' daughters became CEOs. Rickshaw pullers' grandchildren now run hedge funds. Compare that to Britain and Japan. In Britain, you're still defined by which school you went to, who your grandfather was, and whether you say tomato or tomato. In Japan, the family registry, the koseki, can still decide your marriage, your job prospects, your future. These are societies locked in amber, terrified of cutting ties with ancestry. Singapore skipped the inheritance game. Meritocracy, for all its flaws, said, "It doesn't matter who your father was, what can you do?" And that's why Singaporeans grind like peasants in suits, because they know the system rewards effort, not bloodlines. Is it harsh? Yes. Is it exhausting? Definitely. But it works. The irony: Britain and Japan clung to their royals for dignity, but ended up trapped in decline. Singapore embraced its lack of dignity, its peasant roots, and built prosperity. Sometimes having nothing is the best starting point. Sometimes the absence of nobility is the noblest thing of all. So here we are, a tiny island of ex-fishermen and coolies, now outpacing nations with emperors and kings. The peasants won, the royals lost. and history will remember which one mattered more. So here's the final irony. Nations that worship their royals and bloodlines, Japan and Britain, are slowly rotting behind golden curtains. Meanwhile, Singapore, a nation built by fishermen, hawkers, and rickshaw pullers, sits at the global table with a calculator in one hand and an airport terminal in the other. It's the ultimate plot twist. The descendants of peasants became bankers, while the descendants of kings became mascots. The royals wave, the emperors bow, and the peasants count the money. And that leads me to the real question. Which future would you rather have? The hollow pride of a crown on your currency, or the quiet dignity of paying rent on time? Because history doesn't reward bloodlines anymore. It rewards survival, adaptation, results. Singapore had no royals, just sweat, just survival. And somehow that worked. Maybe the peasants were the nobility all along. But now I want to hear from you. Do you think Singapore thrived because it had no kings and emperors holding it back? Or would you still prefer the pageantry of crowns, castles, and cherry blossoms, even if they come with stagnation and decline? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this debate isn't just about Singapore. It's about whether we value history's costumes or history's results.